Hi everyone, it is Thursday, February 4th, and we are tackling intercultural communication today. So in today's session, we're going to be talking about cultural self-awareness. We're also going to cover Hofstede's cultural dimensions, cross-cultural communication. So in addition to the lesson today, I want you to go into chapter 2 in your book and read pages 63 through 68 in your textbook, which covers cross-cultural communication. And then there is a TED Talk video that I have posted on Blackboard. I want you to check that out as well. Okay, so let's talk about cross-cultural communication. The pace of business has really rapidly increased in the last few years, and the different technologies that we have access to now allow us to communicate and do business globally. But what this does is it opens us up to dealing with other cultures. In addition to the globalization of business, we're also seeing more cultures represented in the workplace, even in Canada. So we have this combination of cultures in the workplace now. And because culture has the power to influence behavior, it also has the power to potentially create clashes and misunderstandings in the workplace. So culture has the power to influence behavior. It also has the power to support performance. So companies in the top quartile for ethnic diversity are found to be 35% more likely to outperform the industry median. Also in the United States, a linear relationship between racial and ethnic diversity and better financial performance is shown. For every 10% increase in racial and ethnic diversity on the senior executive team, earnings before interest and taxes rise 0.8%. Additionally, groups with diverse perspectives often outperform groups of like-minded experts. So not only do we see that diversity has the power to influence the people's behavior, but it also has the power to influence company performance. And really, if we utilize cross-cultural communication in a good way, it will prevent those clashes and misunderstandings in the workplace. So how exactly does diversity lead to better performance? So it leads to better decision-making and innovation, greater range of problem-solving approaches, ideas, and perspectives, and that's because you have, like it says, there are different perspectives from different cultures. It takes advantage in talent recruitment, so it can increase the talent pool and attractiveness of a company and improve customer orientation. So being better able to relate and respond and communicate to diverse consumer decision makers. There's this market for relationships, and the more that you can connect with your customers, you can drive those customer decisions in your favor. And if you can have people on your team who are able to relate and communicate with these people, that is a huge advantage to a business. But diversity alone is not enough. Intercultural competence is important and central to team performance. And what do I mean by intercultural competence? So this slide actually reflects results from a study by Disinfano et al. In 2000, which shows how multicultural teams that understand, appreciate, and leverage differences create value and synergy and actually achieve success beyond levels achieved by monocultural teams. So in the study, multicultural teams that ignore and suppress cultural differences are called destroyers. So you can see that indicated there on the left. These teams are full of mistrust, they hold on to information jealousy, and they take every opportunity to attack other team members. Energy that could be positive is drained into negative stereotypes. Team decisions were made by the manager or former leader without genuine discussion among members, and the team destroyed the value rather than created it. In the middle, you see this monocultural teams. And what this means is that these teams do not leverage the differences of innovation or performance advantages. They just equalize their differences, actually suppressing them to smooth processes. And in turn, they suppress the differences in ideas and perspective that the team members can bring to the table. This performance is mediocre at best. Most culturally diverse teams that think of themselves as doing well are really just equalizers. Here in the multicultural teams on the top half on the right-hand side of the screen, these are the teams that acknowledge and support cultural differences. They actually perform at higher levels and exceed expectations. These differences are explicitly recognized and accepted. They're nurtured and their implications are incorporated into every facet of the group's process. These are what they call creators. They create value. The key here is not membership. On average, members weren't any better in their individual areas than those on the destroying or equalizing teams. The key to unlocking this creative synergy was in the team's interactive processes, i.e. in how they leveraged their differences. So how do we improve our ability to interact across cultures and work better in multicultural groups? Well, we need to go from a monocultural mindset to an intercultural/global mindset. So this means we need to increase our own cultural self-awareness, understand ways in which cultures are similar and different to one another. We also need to learn how to empathize across cultures and shift perspectives. Also, it's really important to understand the role of culture in communication. So let's talk about culture. What is culture? Culture is a set of values, beliefs, and norms learned and shared by a group of people. So what is understood or familiar? It's what you know, what you believe to be true, and what you're comfortable with. What you think is normal and not normal. So here you can see the cultural iceberg, and it's really easy to see things when it's laid out this way. So on the top half of this here, you see behaviors and practices. These are the things we can see when we look at someone. These are the characteristics which are apparent to, the casual observer, which is, okay, this is the way they dress. Do they make eye contact? What are their words that they're choosing? Their posture? What kind of foods do they eat? Or what kind of foods do they like? What kind of music do they like? How do they talk to you? These are the things that we can observe. And under this is, they say 90% of the iceberg is under the water, and that's the case in culture. Below the surface, these are the things which we can't see. These are the things that influence what we can't see. So the things under influence what we can't see. We can easily misinterpret what we see based on those behaviors and what they mean to us, not what they actually mean to that person. So these are things like interpretations, so how the core values are reflected in specific situations in daily life, such as working or socializing, and core values, learned ideas of what is considered good or bad, desirable or undesirable, and acceptable or not acceptable. And you can see there's all sorts of external factors influencing that. These are like notions of modesty, beauty ideals, notions of politeness, individual or group identity, personal space, personal responsibility, etc., etc. So in regards to culture, most of that culture is below the surface and it's not visible, just like that iceberg. One's own culture can be invisible and it's not so easily seen by members of other cultures. Cultures are not uniform. Individuals within cultures have different personalities and belong to different subcultures. Cultures overlap and intersect. You cannot tell a person's culture by his or her appearance or ethnic background. People are able to adapt to new cultural environments and norms, which can take time and be difficult. It also requires a lot of communication, understanding, and negotiation. So some final points / reminders about the culture. It's not only when we go outside our culture that we can notice that we have a culture. It's why it's valuable to be in a minority situation, because we can see outside of our own culture. We can see that there are different cultures to us. The differences within national cultures, even just your region, ethnicity, generation, gender, it can be huge. Influences such as class, generation, institutional age, regional culture overlap with national culture, and are very difficult to untangle. And to add into this, personality matters. So even if two people are part of the same culture, their personalities will be totally different. So Hofstede's cultural dimensions. These are a framework developed by Gert Hofstede, one way to examine cultural differences. His theories describe the effects a society's culture has on its members' values and how those values relate to behavior. They're basically generalizations. And an example of one of those is power distance. So people feel reassured that those in charge should be in charge and look for and expect to find comfort in clear directives, versus low power distance, where we tend to look at hierarchies as valuable only when necessary. And people in low power distance cultures value collaboration and more discussion in groups. Another one of Hofstede's generalizations is collectivism versus individualism. So individualism, here you see the person stands alone. In collectivism, people are standing together. So individualistic societies have languages with I in it. Collectivist societies tend not to, interestingly enough. Collectivism societies, things that are important to them: relationships, responsibility, trust, harmony, loyalty, gentleness, humility. Personal survival is secured when the group thrives and prospers. Individualistic societies, they value self-determination, self-expression, uniqueness, individual achievement, strength, confidence. Looking after and taking care of oneself, being self-sufficient secures the well-being of the self and group. So you can see neither of them are bad, they're just different. You can see the different collectivist and individualist societies across the world. So it's kind of separated by country, but you can see the darker purple there are the more individualistic cultures, and the white would be the most collectivist, and then going up pink in those middle areas. So maybe it might be interesting to find your culture, maybe where you're from, kind of get an idea of what kind of culture you may be from. So which are the visible aspects of culture that can be seen in individualist collective societies? Here's the table. So there's individualism and collectivism. So I put all these down at the bottom here, and I thought it might be an interesting for you to try, interesting thing for you to try. So what you can do is you can pause the video, and then you can try to arrange these 7 different things into the table, either individualism or collectivism, and see how you do. Okay, pause it. Okay, so now that you've maybe gone through and put those in those categories, let's look at what they are. And so as you can see, there's differences between the individualism and collectivism cultures. If you are part of one of these cultures, you probably can identify with some of these things here. So let's talk about individualism and collectivism and group work. So may or may not have been in a group already in your courses. You probably will be one in the future. So let's look at how individualism and collectivism cultures can influence that group work. In an intercultural group, there can be large differences in how consensus is valued versus individual expression, differences in how much group members expect to rely on each other versus completing tasks independently. There's differences in comfort level with expressing disagreement, displeasure, or confusion, different understanding of modesty and confidence and how they are displayed, differences in time expected to be spent on relationships versus time spent on processes, different comfort level with standing out and asserting oneself. So the next time you're in a group, if you're in an intercultural group, try to pay attention to these differences, and not for the purpose of suppressing them, but remember the best intercultural groups are ones that acknowledge each other's differences and utilize them and make the best out of those differences, kind of pull the best out of everyone's differences. So let's talk about power difference, which is another one of Hofstede's generalizations. This is how much lower members of society accept that power is distributed unequally. In a high power distance culture, this means that there is a higher level of respect, cooperation, discipline, and hierarchy. So the boss is seen as far higher than the employees. In a low power distance, equality, openness, and consultation are highly valued. So the boss is seen as just a little higher than all the other employees. People from high power distance countries are comfortable knowing what their role is and their expectations in each situation. They expect more direction from teachers and bosses. People in high power distance cultures might stand when a teacher enters the room, or use, the full name, or, ma'am, or in my case, Mrs. Dudenhofer. Whereas in low power distance classrooms, the students will use first names and, won't stand when the teacher enters the room. So there's very different approaches to both schooling and workplace. So here I've made another little table for high power distance and low power distance. So again, if you want to pause the video and you want to try this on your own, I will put up the answers on the next slide. But as a fun kind of quiz thing, go ahead and try it. Pause it now. See if you can move those things in the bottom to where they belong in the table. Okay, so hopefully you have what I have here. As you can see, in high power distance cultures, people are less likely to question their supervisor. Those in high positions are accepted to have special privileges. Students expect very clear and concise instructions from instructors, and the chain of command is very important. In low power distance, students more often will question teachers, and interactions between staff and supervisors is informal. So hopefully you got all those. Here you can see the differences between countries Canada, China, India, and Jamaica, and their differences in individualism and power distance. So notice Canada here on individualism is very high, whereas on power distance in Canada it's relatively low. Whereas opposed to say India, where individualism is not as high, it's about half of what it is in Canada, and power distance is very high. So let's look at the dimensions of the human behavior. Not everything is cultural, but not as much is universal as we tend to think. So the universal are all those ways in which human beings are the same. It's universal or inherited. You know, parents love their children. We need to eat regularly. These are universal facts, right? Cultural, what a group of people have in common with one another, which is specific to the group learned. So these are the things that we've talked about before. This is what you learn is right or wrong, what you think is good or bad, acceptable, unacceptable. And then there's the personal level, which is how much each of us is different from each other. Remember I said personalities matter, and they matter within cultures. And so even in our own cultural group, each individual will be different. So culture is just one dimension of human behavior and should be seen in relation to all the other dimensions, which is personal, cultural, and universal. So let's look at some things that we can do to kind of shift our perspective. We want to understand experience from more than one worldview, because right now we have grown up in a culture and it's one worldview, and demonstrating the ability to act in a manner that recognizes the feelings of another cultural group is a huge benefit to you as a student. It's a huge benefit to you as an employee, and just as a person who is willing to empathize with other people. So how do we develop this empathy? Basically, we have to just experience other cultures. We have to maybe become uncomfortable with our experiences. You know, when we meet new people, try new things. When we go to different cultures, try different things, experience the culture. It might be uncomfortable. You know, the more you do it, you adjust and adapt. The second part of this empathy is that we try to understand it. So empathy across cultures is more difficult because we can't understand each other's personal point of view if we are coming from our own experience. And let me show you what I mean. So here's a comic, but it really puts everything into perspective. So on one side, she says, everything covered but her eyes, what a cruel male-dominated culture. She's seeing this through her lens. And then on the other side, we have nothing covered but her eyes, what a cruel male-dominated culture. So both people are judging each other, they're judging each other's cultures, but they're coming from two completely different cultures, right? But they're looking through their own lens. So we need to ask ourselves these questions. How are we seen by other cultures? And how do we view other cultures? We want to make sure that we're empathizing, but we're also really perceiving others. We tend to judge people and their behaviors from our own cultural viewpoint, assuming that our cultural values about what is good and bad, right or wrong, normal or weird, universal, are universal, and that these behaviors which differ from our expectations reflect personal traits or defects. Ouch, right? So what we think is right or wrong, we are viewing that from our cultural viewpoint, and we assume that it's universal and everybody should think this way. Everybody knows that. It's just basic manners. It's common sense, right? No, not necessarily. So for one example of this, the comfort level of interacting with strangers. So you can see by this chart, China is less comfortable interacting with strangers. Canada is right in the middle, and Jamaica is more comfortable with interacting with strangers. You can do the same exact thing with personal space. You can do this with eye contact. It differs from culture to culture. So now let's look at how we can kind of bring all of this together, right? We've talked about being culturally sensitive. We talked about our cultural self-awareness, trying to empathize and trying to see things from a different perspective. How can we bring this now into communication? Intercultural communication is just understanding cultural differences in verbal language and nonverbal body language communication. So there are a lot of differences in nonverbal communication alone. I've already kind of hinted at this, but eye contact, touch, gestures, physical space, expressions, posture, pitch, volume, amount of speech, impact of silence. So normally I would go and reach out for a handshake when I met someone. Pre-pandemic, right? Of course, now I wouldn't reach out for a handshake for someone. But pre-pandemic, that was my go-to. That's my culture. That's the way I was raised. But in the Middle East, it could be a kiss or hug, or in Japan, it's a bow. So, even just a simple thing in business of a handshake. We think in North America, a handshake is universal, but it isn't. Same with eye contact. In some cultures, eye contact is considered very rude if you're not familiar with that person. I remember someone telling me last year, actually one of my Indian students, that it was very rude to smile at a stranger in Indian culture. And it's so funny because that's totally normal in Canadian culture. If you smile at a stranger in Canadian culture, it's considered polite and friendly. Whereas in Indian culture, if you smile at a stranger, it's considered very rude, which I just learned last year, so I think that is super interesting. It just goes to show you how much we don't know about other cultures and how much we can't really assume is universal. So in group work, there is this indirect versus direct communication, which can completely frustrate you if you're trying to communicate in an intercultural group work setting. Indirect or direct communication may be preferred depending on the individual. The less preferred style may feel unclear or abrupt and pushy. Students used to less direct communication styles may feel unheard, ignored, hurt, shocked, or disrespected when direct language is used or expected. If they're used to talking through things and getting there collectively and, maybe say, oh, let's just cut to the chase. This is what it is. Let's just do this. They might feel unheard or ignored or hurt. Where on the flip side, if the students tend to use a more direct communication style, they might feel confused, frustrated, uncertain of what was communicated when indirect communication is used or expected. So they're used to getting straight to the point and you're trying to explain everything and they're getting confused and frustrated. So you can see in a group work setting, this can be extremely frustrating. It's important to know the different cultures and how this person might be approaching communication. Another difficulty is communicating across language barriers. So if you've ever tried to communicate with someone who doesn't speak your language, you've probably already realized that it is extremely frustrating. So some main things that we need to do to bring down those barriers is avoid assumptions about motivations or personalities based on communication style, e.g. assuming that avoiding eye contact or laughing are signs of disrespect. We make assumptions based on what actions would mean our own culture and limited information from media or personal accounts. So we basically make assumptions based on our own culture. So we have to avoid making these assumptions. Be patient and listen. It may take time to formulate thoughts. Be careful not to interrupt or attempt to complete somebody else's thought. Knowing that understanding different accents is a skill and it takes time to learn. Ask for clarification or repetition. This is perfectly okay. Ask the student to write down or show an example of what they're looking for if all else fails, basically. And then modify your speech if necessary. Slow your speech down a little without exaggerating. Pause between thoughts in order to give a chance to process the language. Avoid slang or be aware and explain it. Rephrase difficult expressions. Be aware that humor doesn't usually translate well across cultures. And then if there is a communication breakdown, write down a word or phrase and ask the other student to write it down. Show example, ask for examples, and if all else fails, use Google Translate or some Google Images. So when these conflicts occur, as I mentioned before, they really have the power to create clashes and misunderstandings in the workplace and in school. So when these occur, we're often unable to recognize the role of culture as it plays in our own expectations and behavior as well as those of others. So typically when these do happen, our first thought doesn't go to the role that culture is playing in it. When interacting with someone of a different culture, it is essential to make an effort to understand the values and intent behind the behaviors. So look past the faults as we see them through our cultural lens and try to see what the person is really trying to get across. What's their intent? Only when you fully recognize how cultures affect behavior and perceptions of your own and of others can you take steps to prevent and resolve these conflicts. I'm a very personable person and I love to make people smile. So actually when I was living in Toronto, when I did business school in Toronto, I would run into people of different cultures all of the time. And I actually took it upon myself to start learning how to say just the simple thing of saying thank you in different languages. So I've gotten up to about 50 different languages. So now I can say thank you pretty much anytime I run into someone and I notice that maybe there's an accent or I notice something that they maybe come from a different culture, I usually ask what language they speak, and then I usually just say thank you in their language. And you'd be surprised how many times people were just so ecstatic to hear thank you in their own language. It's just one tiny little thing, but it's gone a long way in helping me break down some intercultural barriers and opening up conversations with people. Okay, so today's takeaway, avoid assumptions. Remember that you're operating from your point of view, so avoid assuming that that view is universal and avoid those assumptions. Be yourself. 99% of the time, being yourself is totally fine. But you need to watch for negative reactions or results. A lot of our international students are comfortable between cultures in many regards, and much transfers across cultures. So if you do find yourself in a group with someone from a different culture, then just being yourself is the key here. Separate intent and impact. Are you having the impact that you want? Was the other person's intent made to make you feel that way? We need to manage our reactions if we're frustrated or annoyed. Learn more about their culture. Don't react immediately. Don't just assume that they're trying to frustrate you, or they're not very intelligent, or they don't understand the way things are normally done. So don't react immediately. Try to learn more about their cultures. Learn those cultures of your classmates from people of those cultures as much as possible. So aim for a broad and deep understanding. Seek out authentic intercultural experiences, which may be outside your comfort zone, and ask questions with an open mind. And remember to be patient and understanding with others and with yourself. So explain differences in your expectations clearly while making a conscious effort to understand why meeting your expectations and bridging differences might be a challenge, and being open to adjusting your expectations to find some of that common ground. Keep in mind that notions of politeness, respect, kindness vary across cultures when working to resolve any challenges. So it's important to keep this in mind. There are no clear, easy answers or solutions when approaching intercultural conflict. What's most important is that you approach the situation without judgment, with respect, openness, curiosity, and a willingness to learn about the other's culture and understand what that other person's point of view is. Okay, so that's it for today. Remember to watch the video that is posted on Blackboard and check out those pages in your textbook. Remember, there's no class on Tuesday because I'm giving you extra time to work on your case study assignment, and we will reconvene Thursday.